my people, how you doing? I hope you're having a goddamn great day. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we'll be reassessing Erik ten Hag's tactics. The man himself literally said in a press conference, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, something like that, but he literally said that he's had to shift and change the tactics to try and suit the players, and the tactics have essentially evolved. So, yes, we have gone ahead and already made a 4-2-3-1 tactic system, as well as a 4-3-3. Go check those out if you haven't. But more so, the tactics that we will be discussing in this video are slightly different, slightly altered. There are a few player instructions that are going to be somewhat different as well. Of course, we have the likes of Garnacho starting on the right wing, Mainoo starting in the midfield alongside Casemiro. So their roles are also very different to what we may have spoken about before. The likes of Eriksen in the Mainoo role, and of course, the likes of Antony in that role as well. We will also be talking about specific players when they do come into the side, what you can do to the instructions to obviously replicate their roles. The likes of Scott McTominay when he does come in, playing almost as a secondary striker in certain moments, as well as the likes of Antony. Antony and Garnacho's roles are very, very different, as well as some other type of formation and instructions, the defensive structure that they do look to try and set into if they are against a team that is going to press them nice and high up the field and have the ball. The likes of Man City, I mean, we saw against Aston Villa, they more or less reverted into the structure. So we will be talking about that. And then again, a few offensive structures, things that I have been seeing that have been very good for the side when going forward. Of course, it is a 3-1-4-1-1 system. I know it's a bit far out there, but I have seen the structure and it has worked quite well. We saw it against the likes of West Ham. Another good offensive structure that they have used time and again is more or less the 3-4-3 system, and allowing for the likes of Diego Dalot to more or less invert into the midfield. And this more or less does allow you to try and dominate the opposition. So we will be discussing all that in this video. If you can, hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you are new and you would like to see more content like this. It's going to be a long one, but it's going to be worth it. So, taking a look at the base formation, it is going to be a 4-2-3-1 wide. The only changes I have made is I've converted the two wider midfielders into two wingers. So, it is going to be one goalkeeper, two centre-backs, two full-backs, two DMs, two wingers, one attacking midfielder, and then, of course, one striker. So, taking a look at the tactics. Now, the tactics and the tactical vision, I've set it to wing play, and it's more or less going to be wing play throughout the course of the various tactics and defensive and offensive setups. So, more or less, the likes of Manchester United under Ten Hag, they like to work the ball into those wide areas, whether it's the likes of Rashford, Antony, Garnacho, more so in those wide areas, and look to try and penetrate from those wider angles, trying to attack the opposition. They'll more likely try and, implement the quick transition counters into those wider areas as well. So I think wing play best suits them. Obviously looking to try and supply cutbacks and crosses into the box for the likes of Rasmus Højlund, especially when we have seen a very positive side of Manchester United. They are looking very good these days when it comes to trying to supply the centre forward with goal scoring opportunities. What I also like to see with this system is it encourages a nice link-up play with the fullbacks as well as the wingers. So you also want to try and see that as much as possible. As for the defense and the defensive style, it is set to pressure on heavy touch. Now, more so, Manchester United this season have been very good with winning the ball nice and high up the field and turning it into potential goal-scoring opportunities. I think they rank like in the top 3 or so for turnovers high up the field. So you are trying to implement that, but at the same time, with pressure on heavy touch, you are more or less trying to keep the structure and the formation at hand, and they're for trying to, send one or two players to try and pressure the opposition. And if there is a misplaced pass or a heavy touch or potentially just a mistake, as a cohesive unit, your front line as well as your midfielders will move in and trying to win that ball back, and then obviously look to try and turn it into a potential counter-attacking opportunity. For the team width, I've set it to 40 now. It's a nice balanced approach in terms of creating those 1v1 situations, allowing for more of a man-to-man marking system, as well as trying to compact the central areas of the field as best as they possibly can, forcing the opposition sometimes into those wide areas, playing into the hands of what the likes of a Luke Shaw and Aaron Wan-Bissaka, potentially a Diego Dalot, can try and prevent crosses and try to win the ball back, and then obviously look to try and progress it up the field. For the depth, it is set to 70 again, best of both worlds. It teeters on the edge of a high mid-block and just a high line in general. It offers the best of both worlds. You can have your bombing on fullbacks being very involved in the attacking outlets. At the same time, you don't leave that much space in behind to potentially be exploited, so it's quite nice. And of course, you have the likes of Andre Onana, who is going to be a sweeper keeper that can do a very effective job in claiming the ball, recycling it back into play, and looking to potentially start attacking movements going forward. As for the offense, the build-up play I have set is to balance. Now, this incorporates different dynamics of slow build-up, fast build-up, as well as the long ball approach, which we do see the likes of Martinez when he has been playing. He has been quite prone to breaking the team's or the opposition's press with a quick through ball or a ball over the top into one of the forwards. And as well as we also see the likes of Casemiro, every now and then he does play that ball over the top. So you are going to try to incorporate all these different aspects and variations to your offensive system. As well as with the balanced system, it does keep the structural integrity of the formation at hand, and it still allows for your attacking players to try and support more or less in that formation. So you're not trying to have a very widespread, very fluid looking formation. More or less, the striker is going to be central, your wingers are going to be hugging the touchlines, and more so, they're not going to be in and out of possession. Unless the instructions dictate so. Dictates the player, the player's role. So moving on to the chance creation, I've set it to forward runs. Now this will naturally just push your whole team slightly higher up the field, encourage them to be very involved in the attacking play. They can be the wingers, the fullbacks, the DMs. They'll have a nice natural higher position, and that does help in and out of possession, to be fair, whether it comes to winning the ball back, implementing a quick press, or maybe even just looking to pile on the pressure onto the opposition with having so many players almost in their box. As for the width, I've set it to 70. Of course, you are trying to still maintain some width in the side. Your wingers and your fullbacks do a very good job in making sure that they are maintaining the width in the side. So more or less, 70 does do an efficient job. It also opens up quite a few spaces, stretches the opposition's backline, and allows for the likes of Erasmus Højlund, a Bruno Fernandes, a Mason Mount potentially, to be able to work in those little half spaces and trying to exploit those spaces in between the defensive players of the opposition. As for the players in the box, more or less, I've set it to 6, allowing for your front 3, sometimes your front 2 and the additional attacking midfielder, or maybe a Scott McTominay making that run into the box. But more so, you don't want to overcommit too many players with the balanced approach. I think it's a very effective system to have, and then obviously with the other systems, it decreases and increases depending on what you're trying to do. For the corners and the free kicks, as per always, and it will be consistent throughout the entirety of this video, it is always going to be set to 4. So taking a look at the instructions, starting off at the back between the sticks, and that is going to be Andrea Onana. So for the saving on crosses, we've seen this season he has been susceptible to a few error-prone mistakes that have led to goal-scoring opportunities for the opposition. So therefore, I think a balanced approach best suits him. Of course, he can be very aggressive when it comes to claiming those balls, but sometimes he just tends to stand on his line and expect the defense, your defense, to try and deal with the matters at hand instead of trying to command his box and whatnot. So a very balanced approach for him when it comes to that. But in terms of saving outside of the box, he is, and he has shown that he is a very good sweeper keeper, looking to try and read the game as best as he possibly can, waiting for any potential over-the-top balls or potential counter-attacking opportunities, looking to try and cut them out, and then obviously look to try and recycle the possession back into your team's favor. As for your 2 centre-backs, of course, we've got the likes of Varane and Martinez. Slightly different roles. Varane is more of the sweeper of the two, so therefore his interceptions is set to conservative, whereas the likes of Martinez more naturally is more aggressive. And I have said in the past with the interceptions for Martinez, have him set to aggressive, but I tend to think that leaves quite a few holes in your backline, and it can leave you very exposed. So I think normal for him is best, as well as step up. Of course, this will allow him to almost man mark the opposition player and try and get nice and close to them, making sure that they don't have much space to try and operate with when obviously looking to try and attack. So for your fullbacks, both of them, both Dalot and Shaw, have the same roles going forward. So they are going to be told to join the attack, be as involved in the attacking outlet as possible. And the run type is going to be set to mixed, sometimes inverting into the midfield, other times looking to try and supply an overlapping run for one of your wingers. Of course, you've seen, especially of late, since Luke Shaw's returned, the partnership of Luke Shaw and Rashford. Luke Shaw supplying those overlapping runs quite a bit now, whereas before he wasn't doing it as much. So I quite like that change, you could say, from what Ten Hag is expecting from the left back and left wing relationship. And then again, for the defensive positioning, you would expect both of them to be able to step up. It's a very common trait with Ten Hag's defenders. He does expect them to stick nice and close to the opposition player, make sure it's very hard for them to try and, work any offensive movements in your box or even in your half in certain moments. As you'll see here for the likes of Diego Dalot, he's got the same set of instructions and role as the likes of Luke Shaw. Into your midfield, of course, we've got the double pivot of Mainoo as well as Casemiro. We'll start off with Casemiro, the more of the defensive engine of the two, of course. So he's going to be told to tight mark, of course, sticking to his opponent, making sure he is picking up the potential runners in and around your box, making sure that, they can't pop off shots or whatnot. You want him to be very in tune with the defensive awareness that he obviously needs to have to try and protect the back line. The attacking support, I've set it to a balanced approach. Now, this will allow him to sometimes stay back, defend a bit more, or other times venture forward. We have seen Casemiro get nice and hype the field in certain moments. I think the Rasmus Højlund goal against the likes of West Ham, Casemiro was sitting quite deep. He realized that he needs to get forward. He got forward. He won the ball back, leads to a Rasmus Højlund goal. So you are looking to try and do that. As for the interceptions, I've set him to aggressive. You need to have that bite in the midfield, and more so Casemiro does have this. And if we are trying to replicate his temperament, his work rate, it needs to be aggressive. As for the likes of the positioning freedom, as well as the defensive positioning, it is set to cover the center and then stick to position. In terms of the offensive side of things, you don't really require him to pick up the ball from the goalkeeper or the center backs and then progress it forward. I don't necessarily think that is his best role. He can definitely do it, but I think the likes of Mainoo with that role does a better and more effective job. Just like when it was Casemiro and Eriksen, it would be Eriksen picking up the ball and then looking to progress it forward. So, speaking of Mainoo, we're all here for it. You know, I've been looking, I've been assessing, I've been trying to see what he does and what he doesn't do, and he is incredible. Absolutely insane. A madman. He is a man. He's 18, but he is a man. For his defensive behavior, I've set it to a balanced approach. So, therefore, looking to try and maintain the structural integrity of the formation, the double pivot, trying to keep it there, trying to make sure that he is in the way of anything good that the opposition offense is trying to build. So, therefore, still trying to be a thorn in the side. For the attacking supports, I've set him to balanced as well. So, Casemiro and him will have this like partnership of one will get forward, the other one will stay back, and sometimes they both get forward, and that can kind of be a bit annoying, but more times than not, the one goes and the other one stays, which is quite nice. For the interceptions, however, I have set him to normal. You don't really require him to be too aggressive, especially with the other pivot man in Casemiro being set to aggressive. So you need at least one of them to be a bit more calmer in the middle of the park, making sure that he sticks to his position more times than not. For the positioning freedom on the offensive end, I need to dip between the defenders. He is going to be set to being a deep lying playmaker, so that will allow him to drop between the defenders, collect the ball, progress it forward, and he has done a very, very good job when he has obviously played with this position and these instructions. So he is the box-to-box type player, you could say, with Casemiro being more of the sitting type player in certain moments, but nonetheless, he is going to be able, and he is going to be in charge of running the midfield as best as he possibly can. For the defensive positioning, it is set to cover the center, so again, with the likes of Casemiro, also cover the center. You can manually try and drag your DMs out of position into those wider areas if need be, but more times than not, you want them to try and sit in front of the back line and protect and break up as much of the offensive play from the opposition as they possibly can. Slightly up the field though, to your captain, Bruno Fernandes. He's set to come back on defense, looking to always help out on the defensive end of things. It does create a nice work rate for the number 10, and it still allows him to somewhat get on the ball at a slightly deeper rate and then potentially spray the ball into those wider areas, trying to supply Rashford or Garnacho or one of the forwards in transition for a potential counter-attacking goal. For the support on crosses, it's set to balance. Now, I know you can also set Bruno to stay on the edge of the box, because very seldom does he get into the box, but I do know that he does get into the box, so you want to have that nice balanced role where sometimes he's on the edge, other times he's in the attacking third, waiting for a cross or a cutback, or maybe even trying to facilitate in the final third of play. For the positioning freedom, I've set him to free roam. He does tend to pick up those little pockets of space all over the field, looking to try and help out, whether it's in the wider regions or maybe a bit more central and closer to the striker. As for the likes of the interceptions, trying to replicate that nice aggressive Portuguese Magnifico work rate, I've set him to aggressive, and allows him to be very much in tune with running the team and expecting, you know, the players in and around him to have that good work rate mentality. A very realistic approach, if you ask me. As for the likes of Marcus Rashford, now the left and the right wing have slightly differing roles. We have seen of late, ever since, you know, the issues with Rashford, that he has been tracking back, helping out on the defensive end. So therefore, and it has worked quite well, I will say that. Therefore, the defensive support for him is set to come back on defense, looking to try and help out Shaw as much as he possibly can. As for the chance creation, I've set him to stay wide. Now, we have seen that Rashford likes to attack from those wider angles, trying to isolate the opposition fullback and then look to try and attack him, whether it's looking to try and facilitate and cross, or maybe, you know, find something for himself and pop off a shot from either distance or work his way into the box. You often see Rashford working his way into the box at an angle, driving at the opposition player. So with this thought in mind, I decided for him to stay wide rather than, you know, a balanced approach and allow him to sometimes cut inside. He very rarely does that. For the support runs, in order to get the best out of Rashford in FC24, getting behind is going to be essential, and this does help with potential transition balls that you can look to try and fire in over the top. As for the likes of the interceptions, the work rate isn't always there, so therefore normal interceptions is going to be required. But the most important thing is you want him to be in and around the attacking third as much as possible, so he needs to be in the box waiting for a cross. Onto the likes of Alejandro Garnacho. So for his role going forward, the defensive support is set to come back on defense, also looking to try and help out the likes of Diego Dallo as much as possible. For the transgression, however, it is set to a balanced width, so sometimes allowing him to stay wide, other times allowing him to cut inside, whether it's to pop off shots or just potentially pull a man out of position. He tends to do that quite effectively. For the support runs, he doesn't always like to make those runs in behind. He can somewhat come a bit shorter, link up play more effectively with the likes of a Dallo or an Aaron Wan-Bissaka in those wider regions, or maybe link up a bit more with the midfield. As for the likes of the interceptions, I've set him to aggressive, and then finally for the supports on crosses, I've set him to a balanced approach. Sometimes breaking into the box, being a very good goal-scoring threat, other times hanging on the edge of the area, looking to try and facilitate with a cross or a cutback, or trying to work something on the edge of the area. As for the likes of Rasmus Højlund, a man that has come into some really, really good form of late, which has been fantastic. For the support runs, we have seen that he does tend to drift in and out of those central areas of the field, so therefore I think a more balanced approach best suits how he plays in real life, allowing him to sometimes drift a bit wider from that central spot, but other times allowing him to be a bit more central, attacking the crosses and whatnot that gets fired into the box. As for the attacking runs, I've set him to a target man, of course. With a system like this, where you have very much, fast, quick plays in and around him, you would want him to be the focal points, therefore allowing him to be a bit more physical, trying to impose himself on the opposition's backline, back into them, link up play very effectively with the likes of a Bruno Fernandes, and sometimes just be a wall, allowing for one of the players in and around him to be able to bounce the ball off of him and then, work it into a better space or create a better opportunity. We've seen with the likes of Rasmus Højlund that his work rate is very good. He tends to consistently always chase down the goalkeeper, or make sure that he is making the opposition to centre backs feel very uncomfortable with his aggressive marking, and more so that's more or less what Ten Hag wanted when he bought the likes of Højlund. So you want to try and replicate that as well. For the defensive support, it is set to basic, so sometimes allowing him to drop a bit deeper. We did see against the likes of Aston Villa, he was quite deep. It was more so 11 men behind the ball and making sure that nothing was getting past him. And other times against the likes of a West Ham, for example, he was slightly high up the field. So I wanted to try and replicate that role, and I think a basic defensive support does this. Okay, so if you do make rotations and the likes of Scott McTominay as well as Anthony both come into the side, McTominay's role as well as Anthony's role are very different to what Bruno Fernandes as well as Garnacho have. So we'll start off with McTominay. He is set to stay forward, get into the box, and stick to position. Now this, in my opinion, more or less tries to create that secondary striker type role, playing off of the shoulder of the striker more times than not. And we have seen with McTominay this season, when he has been in those goal scoring areas, he's more or less in the same area as Højlund, trying to create overloads and trying to attack the crosses and whatnot. So you are trying to replicate that role for him. And then finally, for the interceptions for McTominay, he is set to normal. As for the likes of Anthony, of course, he is set to come back on defense, stay wide, and then for the support runs, set to balanced. More so, we tend to see Anthony on the touchline trying to take on his opponent more times than not, making sure that he is trying to stretch the opposition in that wider right region as much as possible. For the interceptions, it is set to aggressive, trying to create that nice work rate that Anthony does tend to have. And then finally, for the supports on crosses, you want him to consistently stay on the edge of the box, whether it's potentially whipping in a cross or cutting in and shooting on his left foot. That's more or less what he tries to do in the game in real life. Okay, so taking a look at the defensive structure, of course, it is a very similar structure to the balanced approach, with a few tweaks and alterations to the tactics as well as certain player instructions. So taking a look at the formation at hand, of course it is a 4-2-3-1 wide. I've made no changes whatsoever to it. So therefore it is one goalkeeper, two centre backs, two fullbacks, two DMs, one attacking midfielder, two wider midfielders, and then of course one striker. Looking at the tactical vision is still set to wing play, but with the defensive style, it is set to drop back, looking to try and compact nicely, make sure it's very hard for the opposition players to try and expose and exploit your defense as much as they possibly can. The team width is set to 30, creating a nice compact central unit, making it very hard for the opposition to fit bodies between the lines and try and attack you through the central areas of the field, more or less forcing them out wide. More so, it's a more enhanced version of what the balanced approach is trying to do. As for the depth, it is set to a 25 low block, trying to make it very hard for the opposition players to try and fit balls in behind, trying to exploit on the break potentially. And we did see this against the likes of Aston Villa, especially after Man United had scored their goal. They were quite happy to sit back and maybe just counter every now and then. Obviously, it can lead to a few issues, and we did see that with the likes of Douglas Luiz scoring, but nonetheless, we managed to win. Who cares? But it is set to 25, creating that nice low block. As for the offense, the build-up play is set to fast build-up. Of course, you are going to be counter-attacking more times than not, so therefore direct passing is also going to be a factor with the chance creation being set to that. You want to try and get those forwards in behind, trying to exploit them as best as they possibly can. Obviously, when you are looking to try and soak up pressure, it does tend to let the opponents try and, force players forward, whether it's fullbacks and DMs and whatnot, trying to overrun your players. So if you do win the ball back more times than not, the opposition will be very light at the back, allowing for the likes of a fast, lightning quick Marcus Rashford, a Garnacho, and Anthony, a Højlund, for example, to be allowed to exploit that space in behind. As for the team width, it is slightly wider, but it is set to 80, still allowing for a bit more space to be had, especially when you are in possession of the ball. You want to try and spread the opposition out as much as possible, especially if you are on the counter. If you can try and spread a 2 or 3 man defensive line from the opposition, and you have 2 or 3, maybe even 4 players running in transition, it can help you quite a bit. So trying to generate as much space between the lines as possible is a massive plus for your offensive outlets on the counter. As for the players in the box, I've set it to 5, more so a less toned down version. It will be the likes of a Rashford and a Højlund, and sometimes the likes of a Garnacho or maybe even a Bruno Fernandes breaking into the box, but you're not trying to overcommit too many players. Onto the corners and the free kicks, as per always, set to 4. So, taking a look at the instructions, starting off at the back with Onana, there has been a switcheroo, you could say. Saving on crosses, you expect him to be very aggressive, proactive, claim those aerial balls when they are fired into the box, whether it's from a corner or a free kick or maybe just a regular cross. You want him to be very good at claiming those aerial balls. For saving outside of the box, because you are playing a very deep block, you don't require him to be a sweeper keeper, so therefore, stay on your line, be a bit more of a traditional goalkeeper and try and make those saves. As for the likes of Varane and Martinez, they are basically set to the same set of instructions, conservative, and then as for Martinez, he is set to his base instructions, with the step-up approach being set to stick to position. You don't really require him, especially when you are in a deep block, to follow his man as much or stick that closely to the opposition player. As for the likes of Luke Shaw, as well as Dalot, also set to the same set of instructions. Stay back while attacking, you don't require them to get forward whatsoever. And what I did note was, because fast build-up is set to be on, if you have it set to like a balanced approach, they will more times than not break forward, get into those offensive positions, which can leave you exposed at the back. So stay back is a must, as well as the interceptions being set to normal. You don't require them to drift all around the field and step out of position and potentially be exploited. For the run type, it is set to mix, so when they do have the option to get forward, and more so this will be when you have possession of the ball with the fullback, they'll look to either make those overlapping runs or invert into the midfield. And then finally, like I've said countless times in the last few weeks, but when you are trying to set up a deep block and you are nice and compact centrally, you would still require your wider players in terms of your fullbacks and your wingers to try and pick up the opposition players, trying to prevent those crosses and those dangerous balls being fired into the box. So therefore, step up is essential. As you can see here, for the likes of Dalot, he's got the same instructions as well. Into your midfield, again, a more defensive approach for both Mainoo as well as Casemiro. So, cut passing lanes, being a bit more zonal, trying to intercept play that's in front of them. Stay back while attacking though. You don't expect or require any of them to break forward when in possession of the ball. Stay back, keep that structure, keep that shield in front of that back line as best as you possibly can. Normal interceptions are set to be on for the likes of Mainoo, as well as him being the deep lying playmaker and of course cover the center. As for the likes of Casemiro, he's got the same set of instructions and roles as well. For the DMs, I've set both of them to be the deep lying playmakers, because in case they do have possession of the ball, you'd want them to be able to feed the forwards as fast as possible, whether it's a through ball or a long ball forward. You would expect them to be very adequate in doing so, and we've seen both Mainoo as well as Casemiro have this ability to hit those players in transition. As for the likes of Bruno, he's also set to come back on defense, still looking to try and show that defensive work rate. Stay on the edge of the box though, you don't expect him to break into that attacking third as much, but every now and then he tends to do so. The positioning freedom is set to stick to position, trying to maintain that structure of the formation at hand. And then finally, you still want him to be aggressive, pressing from the front, trying to cause turnovers and issues for the opposition players. So onto your wingers now. Of course, the likes of Garnacho and Rashford, both of them have the same roles as well. Come back on defense, obviously looking to try and help support the defense. Cutting aside and getting behind. Now this does help with the potential transitions that you will be looking to try and launch them into. Arcing their runs, trying to position themselves in the best goal scoring positions that they possibly can. As for the interceptions, it is set to aggressive for both of them. And then for the supports on crosses, it is set to a balanced approach. Sometimes the likes of Garnacho break into the box, other times not so much. As you can see here for the likes of Marcus Rashford, he's got the same set of instructions and roles as well. And then finally, we've got the likes of Rasmus Højlund, still set to a balanced width. Not too much has changed there. You would still expect him to potentially run the wider channels as well as have a more of a central focal points in certain moments. But you want him to be able to break in behind, use his pace, use his explosive abilities, so therefore getting behind is going to be essential. Still want him to aggressively press from the front, and then for this time or this occasion you want him to stay forward, being an outlet ball for the potential counters. I know sometimes you can see him drop a bit deeper and come back on defense, but for me personally, I like him to stay higher up the field and be an outlet ball for the counter. So, onto the more offensive structures, we have the 3-1-4-1-1 system. It's a very aggressive system. It gets Rashford a lot more central into those more attacking, physical areas of the field, and sometimes, just sometimes, you can tend to overrun the more central areas of the field with this lineup. So, for the formation at hand, I have used a 3-5-1-1 system, and I obviously have pushed and pulled a few players in and out of certain areas. So, it is going to be 1 goalkeeper, 3 centre-backs, 3 central midfielders, 1 attacking midfielder, 2 wider midfielders, and then of course your 1 striker. So moving on to the tactics. The tactical vision is still set to wing play. Of course, you are still trying to pull players out of position into those wider areas, and more so your attack will be created from those wider channels, whether it's the likes of a Luke Shaw or a Garnacho whipping and crosses, supplying danger balls into that attacking third. You still require your wingers and your wider players to be very instrumental in the attacking phase of play. For the defense, a slight tweak and variation to it. The defensive style is set to a pressing after possession loss. Of course, this is your offensive structure. You want to try and implement a very aggressive press when out of possession of the ball. You're trying to maintain the ball as best as possible. For the team width, it is set to 45. Still a nice compact structure somewhat, creating those 1v1 situations, allowing for a bit more of a each man has a responsibility to try and mark the opposition player out of the game. So therefore, 45 replicates this quite well. We have seen this countless times with the likes of Ten Hag. We saw the system mainly against the likes of West Ham, so it's a very good system. It can somewhat be exposed in certain moments. Of course, you are playing a very high line, slightly higher than the balanced approach as well as the defensive approach, set to 80. So you can somewhat be exposed on the break, and of course you do have a back 3, so you need to be aware of that. But when in possession of the ball, you have a whole lot of players in and around the opposition's half, and that does help with the offense. Speaking of which, the offensive build-up is set to slow build-up. Of course, you are looking to try and look after the ball, create those, triangle passages of play, maybe even the diamond passages of play every now and then, trying to maintain and look after the ball and trying to work the best possible opportunities for your attacking players. The chance creation is set to forward runs, still looking to try and push players higher up the field, encourage them to get forward and attack as much as possible. But like I said earlier, you can be susceptible to potential counterattack, so you need to be a bit more wary of that. So for the width, it is set to 80. Now, you are going to be playing with around 4 midfielders, so you need to try and generate a lot of space for those players in and around the opposition's half. So pulling players out of position into those wide areas does do a very effective job, and therefore I think 80 does this very effectively. As for players in the box, I've set it to 80. You are trying to commit a lot of players forward and into those attacking areas to try and obviously score the goals, so therefore I think 8 is more applicable for the more attacking phase of play. As for the corners and the free kicks, as for always, it is set to 4. Okay, so taking a look at the instructions at hand, for the goalkeeper, of course, Onana, for saving on crosses, he is set to a balanced approach, as well as saving outside of the box, he is set to a sweeper keeper. Of course, you are playing a high line, so therefore it is going to be required. For the likes of Casemiro, his role is set to join the attack and step up. He does tend to get nice and high up the field and look to try and be involved in the attacking outlet, but positionally wise, he is set to be that central centre-back when out of possession of the ball. As for the likes of Martinez, you do tend to see him when they do take up this formation. He does tend to drift wide. We saw against the likes of West Ham, he was quite happy to drift into that wider left channel, support play, build up play in those wider areas, and be very effective. So therefore, overlap is going to be essential. It does allow him to make those outside runs and more or less get him nice and close to the likes of a Bruno Fernandes and a Luke Shaw. Of course, you would still expect and require him to step up, just like with the likes of Casemiro. I don't know if I mentioned that, but you would expect both of them to have that step up aggressive mentality. And then finally, for the likes of Varane, here's the more conservative one, so therefore conservative interceptions is set to be on for him, and he's looking to try and mop up just behind the likes of a Casemiro and a Martinez. The more controlled DM of the two, of course, with Casemiro starting in the back line, Mainoo is in charge of trying to run the midfield, so therefore he has a slightly deeper starting position. And more so, the attacking support is set to a balanced approach, so it can still allow him to get forward and be very involved in the attacking outlets. For the support on crosses, however, you want him to stay on the edge of the area looking to try and rotate and facilitate the pace of play, running the midfield as best as he possibly can. The interceptions is set to normal. You don't really require him to be too aggressive because you have a very aggressive Martinez and Casemiro just in behind him, as well as cover the wing. You would expect him to try and drift into those wide areas, pick up the runners, try and stifle the opposition's counter-attack as best as he possibly can in those wider sections of the field. And then finally, the positioning freedom is set to free roam, allowing him to potentially drift and collect the ball off of the backline and progress it forward when required. As for the likes of the inverted fullback in Diego Dalot, of course, slightly more inverted than the likes of Garnacho, who is on the wing. But for him and his attacking support, you would expect him to drop between the defenders. Now, he does tend to get forward, whether this is set to be on or not. He does tend to get forward, so therefore it's not really a massive mistake or error. But in certain moments, you do also want him to try and drop a bit deeper and help support the likes of a Kobe Mainoo when it comes to trying to run and control and start the offense when building up and going forward. For the support on crosses, it is set to stay on the edge of the box, but every now and then you do tend to see him breaking into that attacking third and potentially getting on the end of the potential cross or a cutback or whatnot. You do see him in and around that attacking area. For the interceptions, you want to still replicate that aggressiveness that he does tend to show when he is inverted into the midfield, and therefore interceptions is set to aggressive, looking to also help with that counter-pressing set of instructions that Ten Hag more or less wants from his players, so therefore I think aggressive is best. For the defensive positioning, I've told him to cover the wing, looking to somewhat take up a more natural right-back position when looking to work his way back and maybe in and out of, or maybe out of possession, he can look to try and drift into that wider right back region. And then finally, for the positioning freedom, you want to more or less stick to position. You don't need him drifting or, having a free roam role. You just require him to stay in the formation at hand and stick to that right hand side. Onto the likes of Bruno Fernandes, he's set to stay back while attacking, allowing him to more or less try and facilitate from the edge of the area and outside of the box, not too involved inside that attacking third. The support on crosses, he is set to stay on the edge of the box, again looking to try and facilitate and whip in crosses and supply opportunities for the forwards in and around him. Aggressive interceptions is set to be on form, as well as cover the wing and then free roam. He is the chief creator when this formation is more or less in play. As for the likes of Luke Shaw and Garnacho, slightly different roles as well. So for Luke Shaw, he is more naturally a left back, therefore he'll have a bit more of a defensive awareness to his game. So you would expect him to come back on defense, stay wide, and have a balanced approach for the support runs. Now, more so with roles like this for wider fullbacks or more attacking fullbacks, I would tell them to get in behind. But we have seen with Luke Shaw, he does tend to somewhat drift inside, exchange and interchange positions with the players in and around him. So you still want to try and replicate that role for him, and more so, I think a balanced approach does do this. It can still allow him to drift more centrally or maybe hug the touchline and look to try and attack out wide. As for the likes of the interceptions, I've set it to normal, and then finally stay on the edge of the box, looking to try and consistently facilitate for the players in and around that attacking third. So moving on to the likes of Alejandro Garnacho onto that right midfield area. He's set to a basic defensive support, sometimes looking to help back, other times hanging slightly up the field and being a bit more of a counter-attacking component. Staying wide, though, is going to be essential, and he can be assisted in those wider regions by the likes of a Dalot, a Mainoo, potentially a Marcus Rashford drifting into those wider areas. But most importantly, you want to try and allow him to express himself by getting forward, getting in behind, penetrating the opposition's backline, making sure that he is being a nuisance in those wider right regions. As for the likes of the interceptions, it is set to aggressive, and then finally you want him to be able to break into that box, attack those crosses and those cutbacks, and make sure that he is potentially getting on the score sheets. Finally, for the likes of Rasmus Højlund, a very similar role to before, as in terms of the balanced approach, a balanced width, target man, aggressive interceptions, and then a basic defensive support. Okay, and then finally we are moving on to the 3-4-3 system. It does allow for Marcus Rashford to resume his more natural left wing area, and it does more or less allow the likes of Luke Shaw to slot into that more natural centre back role. Now, the reasoning for me creating two different offensive, tactics is we have seen the likes of Ten Hag rotate and show rotation throughout the course of games. I mean, against West Ham, we saw Casemiro in that back line, as well as we saw Casemiro higher up at the field with Luke Shaw in the back line. So I wanted to try and replicate those two different structures. So therefore, we have gone ahead and created this one. So as for the formation at hand, it is a 3-4-3, and I have dragged and pulled players into these specific positions. So therefore, it is going to be one goalkeeper, 3 centre-backs, 1 DM, 2 central midfielders, 1 attacking midfielder, 2 wingers, and then of course 1 striker. So moving on to the tactics, and the tactical vision is still set to wing play, and you will see that more or less all these things are still the same because the core values of the attacking structures don't really change or alter too much apart from the offense. Now, with this offense, I went for a more balanced approach as well as a more possession-based brand of football. You're looking to try and create a bit more and have a bit more patience when building your attack when obviously in that final third. So we do tend to see this quite a lot. Obviously the wing is stretching the players moving and rotating in and around those central areas of the field, waiting and probing and waiting for a potential opportunity to try and attack. So that was my thought process when creating the offensive tactics for this, but otherwise, more or less, everything else is the same. So, taking a look at the instructions for the final time of Andre Onana, he's set to a balanced approach for the saving on crosses as well as a sweeper keeper. For Martinez, he's got the same role. Set to step up, be very aggressive and imposing, of course, but this time, obviously, he's not looking to try and drift anywhere. He's taking up that central mantle in the defense. For Luke Shaw, of course, he is a left back, so you still want to have him, progressing nice and high up the field, supporting the attack when required. So therefore, overlap as well as step up is going to be a thing for him. And then obviously for Varane, nothing has changed for him throughout the course of these instructions, and therefore he is set to conservative interceptions. Into the midfield now, of course, we've got the likes of Casemiro, set to cut passing lanes, of course, a bit more of a zonal awareness to him. But for the attacking support, you want him to be able to drop between the defenders every now and then, collecting the ball off of the backline and then looking to try and progress it forward. As well as, if the ball is turned over, you have an extra defensive player that can potentially stop the build-up and the attack of the opposition. The interceptions, I've set it to normal. You can have it on aggressive, but it can potentially leave you exposed, especially if he is trying to chase the ball and the opposition tend to play around the likes of Casemiro. So therefore, a bit more of a structural, calmer approach to him, and it does maintain the structural integrity of this very light backline. And then finally, you want him to be able to stick to position and then cover the center, not really requiring him to drift wide and potentially exposing the back three. So moving on to the left-sided central midfielder. So for the likes of Kobbie Mainoo, he's set to a bit more of a balanced approach for his attacking support, sometimes dropping a bit deeper, helping support the build-up play from the back, other times hanging slightly up the field and being a bit more of an offensive outlet, linking up very effectively with the likes of a Bruno Fernandes. For the support on crosses, it's set to balance, so it can allow him to sometimes break into that attacking third, or sometimes allow him to just hang on the edge of the area and trying to facilitate and rotate the play. The interceptions is set to aggressive. Now, with an offensive system like this, if you do turn the ball over, you are looking to try and implement a very aggressive press, and therefore aggressive interceptions is set to be on form to try and effortlessly work and win that ball back very effectively high up the field. As for the likes of the defensive positioning, it is set to cover the wing. This is more or less to try and help out the likes of a Rashford and a Garnacho, who might not always track back or might not track back effectively, and therefore you would require your 2 central midfielders in the likes of Dalot and Mainoo to try and track those runners. For the positioning freedom, however, I have set him to free roam. This allows him to drift all throughout the course of the field, allowing him to pick out his little pockets of space, get on the ball, and trying to facilitate the offense. Speaking of which, the likes of Diego Dalot, he's told to stay back while attacking, as well as stay on the edge of the box. Now, this is more or less to try and help support the likes of Casemiro. If the build-up player is, under a lot of strain and pressure, or maybe the ball has been turned over, he'll look to try and drop a bit deeper, and obviously look to try and add another passing option at a deeper rate. But more so, again, you do have the players in the box being set to 8, so therefore, every now and then he does tend to break into that attacking area. The interceptions is set to aggressive, as well as cover the wing for the defensive positioning, looking to try and help support Garnacho. And then finally, for the positioning freedom, you want him to stick to position. So, onto the captain, Bruno Fernandes, in that attacking midfield role. So for the defensive support, I have set him to basic. Because you have 3 players in and around him, you don't really always require him to consistently drop deep. Therefore, a basic support can be very effective. It can also allow him to be a bit more of an offensive outlet, potentially. As for the support on crosses, I've set it to a balanced approach, allowing him to sometimes drift into the box, other times on the edge of the area, looking to try and facilitate with the likes of Kobbie Mainoo. And then just like with your left-handed sided midfielder, he is set to a free roam role, popping up in the little half spaces, pulling players out of position, opening up spaces for other players to try and work into, and more or less trying to facilitate and create havoc for your team going forward. As for the interceptions, I've set it to aggressive, replicating that aggressive work rate. So onto your wingers, both Rashford and Garnacho have the same roles in this formation. Come back on defense, of course, looking to try and help out as much as possible, but staying wide, looking to try and hug those touchlines, spread the opposition backline as much as possible, open up lots of pockets of space for the likes of a Mainoo and a Fernandes to try and operate in with the stay wide approach. The support runs, because you are trying to pile on pressure and show a bit more of a possession-based brand of football, you don't necessarily always require them to break in behind and use their pace. Sometimes having them drift more central, link up play very effectively with the midfielders in and around them, that can also be a very good phase of play for the wingers. As for the interceptions for Rashford, it is set to normal. And then, of course, you want them to be able to get into that attacking third. As you'll see here for the likes of Garnacho, he's got the same set of instructions as well, apart from the interceptions being set to aggressive. And then finally, we've got the likes of Rasmus Højlund. So for this role, we do see a slight change to it. He is set to stay central for his support runs. Not looking to drift wide, you do have the likes of Rashford and Garnacho as well as supporting players in and around him. And for a formation like this, I always say that a player with the physicality that Højlund does have, you don't necessarily require him to drift along the backline. Stay central, be a focal point, link up the play in and around those central areas of the field very effectively, and I think he does do a very good job. For the attacking runs, it hasn't really changed. You still want him to be a target man, as well as the interceptions are still set to be aggressive. Finally, for the defensive support, allowing him to drop off the backline in some moments, because you will be pressing the opposition high up the field, and you sometimes do require your striker just to drop off a bit more and link up play very effectively at a slightly deeper rate. In turn, this will obviously pull out opposition players from their positions, and obviously you can look to try and exploit those positions when your striker has left the central areas of the field every now and then. But otherwise, he can also look to stay forward and be an outlet for a potential counter-attack. So there you have it, people. One of the longest videos I've done on my channel, but nonetheless, we are all educated with the Erik Ten Hag system. So if you can, leave a like, subscribe if you are new and you do enjoy content like this, that would be absolutely appreciated. But most importantly, guys, out of 10, I would give these tactics a solid 9.5. I think they are absolutely fantastic. I've used them throughout the course of my personal Manchester United career mode, and yeah, they work very, very well. So if you guys can, let me know down below how you have found them, what they would rank out of 10 for you guys, and of course, until the next time, I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm out.